Thank you everyone for coming to the July meeting of the Stat Society New South Wales branch. My name is Thomas. I'm the Vice President of the branch. Our President Jake is looking under the weather, so he has to take the early mark. So I'm stepping in for him. Today it's our pleasure to have Susanna coming all the way from Brisbane to give the July meeting talk. Susanna is the research fellow at the Institute of Health and Biomedical Innovation at QUT. Prior to his work at Cancer Council Queensland, and before that at the University of Queensland. And of course, she's one of our superstars in STEM, among many others as well. We have all over on Twitter. You should all do that by now. She's also very active in community service, including the Vice President of the Stat Society on membership for the Stat Society of Australia, and also subtechnical editor for the Australian and New Zealand journal Statistical. And today, Susanna is going to talk about the incidence map. The future is here.
Thanks very much. It's a privilege to be here, so thank you for your welcome. A long time ago, in a galaxy not so far away, to be precise, in London, 1868, when Dr. Alfred Haberland gave a lecture to demonstrate that cancer should be considered a distinct public health concern. And what did he use to prove his case? Maps of cancer mortality. Now, rather confusingly, red in these maps actually indicates low cancer mortality, and blue indicates high cancer mortality. Other cancer maps rapidly followed. Some were mapped to the local neighbourhood area, such as this one, which shows black cancer houses. It also shows no regard for patient privacy. Others took a more regional approach. This map in France is actually comparing cancer incidence rates against air pollution. And so the rectangles indicate the relative cancer incidence rate, and the fuel used for cooking or heating is shown as a red dot for wood, a black dot for coal, and the letter C for charcoal. Almost exactly 150 years passed between Dr. Haberland's lecture on the 30th of November 1868 and the launch of the Australian Cancer Atlas on the 25th of September 2018. Between these two time points, several pivotal advances occurred that have really enabled my research to happen. And the first is we actually have better quality cancer data now. In part, this stems from a greater understanding of cancer. We now know that distinct cancers are really very different diseases and have different risk factors. But we also have much better diagnostic methods too. And in Australia, cancer is one of the few diseases where we have practically complete incidence data. A second key advancement has been in the GIS and location details. Now, the areas that we're using for the Cancer Atlas are statistical areas too, or SA2s, and these really vary a lot in size. So in remote areas, they're very big, but in urban areas, they can be quite small, down to 0.8 square kilometres. And so this means we really need accurate location details. Now, the data we're using was actually collected by 8 different cancer registries, and these have different approaches to actually collecting and assigning location details. So some of them geocode the exact street address, which means it's very accurate when they're assigning it to the SA2, but others actually use an algorithm to assign their suburb and postcode. And when we were initially doing our analyses, we did find some issues that look like this, where we might have one suburb that's overlapping multiple SA2s, and everyone's assigned to the red areas, and no one's assigned to the neighbouring blue areas. But even the process of giving cancer registries this feedback was really valuable, and a lot of them did end up giving us improved location details. So the population sparseness in places means that our data is quite sparse, and so we can't just calculate a simple rate because that'll be quite unstable over these areas. So another key advancement that's enabled this research is increase in statistical tools and models available. And there's lots of advantages to doing small area modelling. So firstly, it addresses confidentiality concerns. No one can back calculate the actual numbers. It provides reliable results, enables adjustment for key influences, and also provides uncertainty around the estimates. And all of these things were really important for the Australian Cancer Atlas, but something that a lot of cancer maps have overlooked is the providing uncertainty around our estimates. And in 2016, The Lancet published the Guidelines for Accurate and Transparent Health Estimates results reporting. This has the acronym GATHER, and it's an 18-point checklist. And number 16 is to include the uncertainty around the estimates. So we're really keen to do that. And one of the statistical approaches that really is great for accurately capturing uncertainty is within the Bayesian paradigm. And so for anyone unfamiliar with Bayes' theorem, this is what it looks like, and that's where Bayesian gets its name from. And so if we say that A is our parameters and B is our data, then our posterior is dependent on our likelihood, which is our distribution of our data given the model parameters, and our priors, which represents our current knowledge about the model parameters. So within Bayesian, the key thing is we're putting these priors on our models, and that means we can easily include spatial structure into those priors. One of the most popular model priors used for Bayesian disease mapping is the intrinsic conditional autoregressive distribution. And here, if we have a weighting of 1 if areas I and j are neighbours and 0 otherwise, then you can see that it's a normal distribution with the mean over averaging over our neighbours, and the variance is divided by the number of neighbours also. And normally that neighbourhood is based on adjacency. So in the little diagram, the orange UI area has neighbours of all the areas with J subscript. And in this distribution, that's how we get the spatial structure. But, Bayes' theorem was published in 1763, which is even before Dr. Haviland's lecture. But it was only in 1993 that the first fully Bayesian cancer maps were actually published. So why did this take so long? Well, partly, we really needed computational methods and appropriate software to actually be able to solve these very complex models. And so the final key advance in the last 150 years is really that we're living in the digital age. We have access to very advanced computing power now. So meet ENIAC. It was one of the very original mechanical computers, and it was used to run Monte Carlo methods. Now, today's slick devices are much more compact and have better processing speeds, but most of my research has really used Markov chain Monte Carlo methods. So just a variant on the original methods run on ENIAC. And for anyone unfamiliar with Monte Carlo methods, stigmatized because there's MTM happening this week in Sydney, but also it's just a random simulated process conditional on the previous values, and it's excellent when equations are analytically intractable. So these 4 components have been critical to the success of my research. But the motivation for my research came partly from a paper by Bruce Armstrong and others, which was published in 2007. It stated that achieving health equity for all Australians is really the preeminent challenge facing us. And he specifically mentioned inequalities around where people live. Additional motivation actually came from this beautiful report published by Cancer Council New South Wales, and they looked at several different cancer types for incidence and mortality at the LGA level. But in Queensland, we actually like things to be big. So we have more big attractions than even New South Wales. And this includes things like the big pineapple, the big mango, the big mandarin, and in case you think it's all fruit, the big cane toad. We are truly awesome in Queensland. And but when I started 10 years ago in this research, we had no small area cancer studies. So a few studies had looked at big areas, like these 5 remoteness categories. And here you can see that most of Queensland is categorized as remote or very remote. But 50% of our population actually lives in that tiny pale yellow corner in the southeast. So all of these areas are really huge. The most detailed analyses prior to my research divided Queensland into 14 areas, but these are still big. So we divided Queensland into 478 areas, and this was using statistical local areas, or SLAs, and they're the precursor to the statistical areas too that are used in the Australian Cancer Atlas. And I'd like to spend just a little bit of time talking about some of my work on Queensland before returning to the Australian Cancer Atlas. So the 2 key goals in the Queensland work was really trying to understand where are there spatial inequalities in cancer outcomes and why are these occurring. And we looked at incidence and survival for 19 different cancer types. And for incidence, we're using the BYM, the Bisset, York and Mollier, also known as the convolution model. And here our cases are following Poisson likelihood. We have a mean that's the product of the expected cancer niche area by the model SIR, which is the standardized incidence ratio. And our log SIR is very simply just the intercept plus 2 random effect components. And the UI term is spatially structured. That has an intrinsic car prior, which is why it is spatially structured. So it's allowing for there to be spatially structured variation between areas. And the VI term is just the line for independent variation between areas, so unstructured variation. It's given a vague normal distribution, more vague than that diagram would actually suggest. So, time for an audience question. Can everyone clap your hands twice? Thank you. That is still awake. So the question is, so this model, as it is currently formulated, is it allowing for age-structured differences between areas? So there's two possible answers, yes or no. So clap your hands twice if you believe this model is adjusting for population age differences between areas. Okay, brave person, thank you. Clap twice if you believe the answer is no. Well, I'm very sorry to say this, but the answer is actually yes, because they're actually allowed in the expected counts. So because that's actually calculated as the age-specific rates for the Queensland average, it's multiplied by the population in each of those age groups, then we're actually adjusting for age differences in that way. So these are our results for a couple of our 19 cancers, and you can see it's very different patterns here for incidence. So the SIR here has orange and red as above the Queensland average, pale yellow is around the Queensland average, and blue is below the Queensland average. And you can see for female breast cancer, tended to be lower incidence in more remote areas, higher survival in more urban areas, whereas for male lung cancer, it tended to be higher incidence in many of those more remote areas, and also higher incidence in some of those low socioeconomic urban areas. And across all 19 cancers, we found quite a few that had spatial variations that we considered significant. And the way we considered it to be important was not just by looking at the maps, but we actually calculated a global clustering test. This was called Tango's Maximized Excess Events Test, and it gives you p-values, and so we categorized them into 4 categories. So if it was less than a p-value of 0.01, it was considered to be strong. If it was between 0.01 and 0.05, it was considered to be moderate. Anything beyond that we didn't really think was important, but we did have a weak and a none category. And so of these cancers with spatial variation, male lung, male esophageal, and cervical tended to have higher incidence in more remote areas, whereas many of the others actually had higher incidence in more urban areas. So it's quite a different pattern depending on the cancer type. But we also looked at cancer survival. And survival is really a key measure of cancer patient care because it can divide the survival into really diagnostic and treatment components. And so it allows us to really evaluate the healthcare system more carefully. And there's different ways you can measure survival. So you can measure overall survival, and this is when, if anyone's died at all, it's counted as a death. So if we had 3 deaths, no matter what their cause is, we count them as deaths. The other option is to look at net survival, and here we're just trying to capture the death that actually due to the disease of interest. And there's different ways you can go about that. Now, generally, overall survival is not considered ideal if you're looking at small area variation, because you can have confounding from differences in unrelated mortality in the areas. But there's multiple ways to look at net survival. So 2 key frameworks people tend to use would be cause-specific, and here it's normally based on death certificates. So this means out of our 3 deaths, if only 1 death certificate said it's due to, say, breast cancer, then we count 1 death, and the other 2 people are actually censored at their date of death. But another option is relative survival. And here we put those 3 deaths into our model. We don't care what the death certificate says, but we subtract deaths that we consider to not be due to cancer. And that's based on a cancer-free population, but in reality, it's normally just the general population. And so here we have our 3 deaths put into our model, minus we assume there's 1 death expected, and so we actually end up with 2 deaths that we consider to be due to the breast cancer. It's time for another audience question. So if you were calculating cancer survival for Queensland or Australia, which one of these would you prefer, cause-specific or relative survival? So clap twice if you prefer cause-specific. Clap twice if you prefer relative survival. Or what you call split this time. You know, personal preference is fine, but population-based cancer registries generally prefer the relative survival approach. And that's just because often cause-specific survival, it can be quite hard to determine if a death is really due to cancer or not. Often that's because there could have a complication from a cancer treatment, but whether it's attributed to cancer or something else is unclear. But you know, not many people have actually looked at small area variation in relative survival. when I started, we could only find 2 studies, and they were both international studies. So one was looking at prostate cancer in a region in the UK, and that was by Leslie Fairley and others, and another was looking at breast cancer in France. And we chose to use the model that Leslie Fairley had used. And what she did was to take the relative survival that's recommended by Paul Dickman, it's just a GLM. And so we have our deaths over each follow-up time period and our covariate groupings. And normally our covariate here would include age. And it's following up as on distribution again. And we have a mean. And the mean, we then have this non-standard link function. So we have our mean deaths minus our star, which is our expected deaths. So in our previous example, 3 would be our mean, and 1 would be our D star. So we end up with 2 excess deaths, or deaths we attribute to the cancer. And those are dependent on our log person time at risk, which is an offset term, and intercept, which varies by 4 log here, and any covariates we want to include. So what Leslie Fairley actually did was to take that model, put it within a Bayesian framework, and add in 2 area level frailty terms. And these are actually exactly the same terms that we saw in that BYM model. So one of them is given the intrinsic car prior, it's aligned for spatially structured variation, and another is just given random variation. So it's aligned for independent correlation, no correlation between errors. And so we ran this on our 19 different types of cancer, again for Queensland. And these are the 2 cancer types that we saw before that had very different incidence patterns. You can see very similar survival patterns here. And we're modeling excess hazard ratios and mapping those on these. So here brown is actually high excess hazard ratios. That means it's actually low survival. And pale yellow is around the average, and green is low excess hazard ratio, which means high survival. So I find it easier to just think of brown is bad and green is good. But you can see that there tends to be that very consistent poor survival in more remote areas and higher survival in more urban areas. And of the cancers where we actually found, you could, but we did not add in socioeconomic at this stage. We will in a second. So of these cancers, we actually found that same pattern. So poorer survival in more remote areas, better survival in more urban areas, very consistently. So having found out where there were inequalities and what cancers were happening, we then wanted to investigate why these were occurring. And when it comes to cancer survival, there's several things that really influence how likely you are to survive through cancer. So the stage your cancer is diagnosed at, so that's how big it is, how much it's spread throughout your body, the care you receive, what treatment you undertake, and any patient factors like age, lifestyle factors, and comorbidities, other conditions you have. Now of these, the single most important thing determining whether you will survive a cancer diagnosis or not is how advanced the cancer is diagnosed, so your cancer stage. So we really wanted to include these in our models. But in Australia, most cancer registries do not routinely collect the cancer stage information. But in Queensland, we could get stage details for colorectal cancer, and we could get an approximation for breast cancer. So we focused our more detailed analyses on these 2 cancer types. And so we just ran exactly the same model again, but here we're adding in tumor stage, we're adding in socioeconomic status of the area, and we're adding distance to radiotherapy treatment centres, and also for colorectal cancer, the sex of the patient. And we wanted to see the influence of these individually, so we added them in one at a time. So these are the results for breast cancer survival. The map on your left is exactly the same map we saw before, it's just been adjusted for age. The map on your right has been further adjusted for tumor stage, and you can see a lot of that variation has been mitigated. Our 10-year p-value is still indicating there's a little bit of variation still happening though. And so when you further adjusted the socioeconomic status of the area, that removed that additional variation. Adjusting for distance to radiotherapy treatment really had little impact after that. So what this is suggesting is that in remote areas, there are more or greater proportions of women that are being diagnosed at more advanced stages, and that's really a key driver of those inequalities that we're seeing. When we looked at colorectal cancer, the map on your left is adjusted for age and sex. There's a lot of variation there. When we further adjusted for tumor stage, really not much change. The p-value is still very significant, and most of that overall patterns are still there. When we adjusted for socioeconomic status, the map pattern didn't change dramatically, but these are very broad thematic categories, and our p-value is still very significant there. And even adjusting for distance to radiotherapy really didn't take everything away. So after checking out the literature, it seems that possibly treatment differences might be driving colorectal cancer inequalities, but it seems it's very hard to capture these well, especially since it might not even be just the treatment they receive, but it might depend on things like the experience of the surgeon as well. So another thing we wanted to examine and quantify was how many premature deaths could be prevented if there were no spatial inequalities. And so when I say premature deaths, I'm talking about deaths within the first 5 years of diagnosis. And we're really keen on capturing the non-diagnostic effects, so our model was adjusted for tumor stage of diagnosis. And the way we separated out the spatial inequalities component was through the spatial fraction. So our models have the two area level frailty terms, one's spatially structured and one's unstructured. And we just took the variance of these. So we took the marginal variance of our spatially structured term and divided that by the sum of our marginal variance of that term, plus our unstructured variance term, separated into the spatial part. And what we found for colorectal cancer and breast cancer, this was examining 10 years of data, was that there are actually 470 deaths within those first 5 years of diagnosis that could be attributed to just spatial inequalities. For breast cancer, it was 170 deaths. And we're assuming they could actually reach the top 20% of survival, so that top quintile. And so that was almost 8% of colorectal cancer deaths in those SLAs that were below the top 20% survival, and 7% of breast cancer deaths. And we have our uncertainty around these estimates. So our 80% credible intervals indicated that this is between 407 and 944 deaths, just for these two cancer types alone. So this really indicates that spatial inequalities are important and really do need to be addressed. So one thing to note about this model though, and there's a lot of advantages to it, but it does have this piecewise constant hazard happening. We're assuming that the hazards are actually constant in these time intervals. And just to show you graphically what that looks like, the green line here is our smooth estimated hazard for breast cancer patients in Queensland. And the orange lines are what we actually have in our model using annual time intervals for our hazards. So you can see they vary between ones, but it's consistent over that full time interval. So other disadvantages of this is that because we're actually aggregating our data when we put it into our model by covariates, by the time splits, and by each area, then that means it's really hard to include continuous covariates. And our hazard and survival functions are not smooth, and it constrains the model complexity. So if people want to get around these issues, another approach is to use a parametric model. And these also have advantages like it's comparatively easy to incorporate time-varying effects, and you can also predict other functions of your parameters like absolute levels of risk. But one reason why people have shunned these to some extent is that often they don't fit the baseline hazard very well. And if we look at our gamma distribution and a Weibull distribution compared to our actual estimated baseline hazard, you can see they're not capturing that variation very well. So what is the solution? We need our parametric models to be more flexible. And Royston and Palmer have developed a version of what they call flexible parametric models. Now in a Weibull distribution, here on the cumulative scale, so the log cumulative hazard is just this linear function of time. In the flexible parametric form, we're actually doing that instead with splines. And if we don't have any knots or places where piecewise polynomials joined together, then actually reverts back to being a Weibull distribution. And if we look at it graphically, we can see that our flexible parametric model can actually capture that baseline hazard a lot better. And so Nelson had developed a relative survival version of flexible parametric models. And because it's relative survival, it means we're separating that total hazard into two components, our cumulative expected hazard, which is based on the population mortality rates, and our cumulative excess hazard, which is what we consider to be due to the disease of interest. And so our log cumulative hazard, excess hazard, is then just we have our splines and our baseline, and it has the covariates. So we actually did just what Leslie Fairley did with Paul Dickman's GLM, but we did it with Nelson's flexible parametric relative survival model. We put it into a Bayesian form, and we then added two area level frailty terms. And they're exactly the same two terms. We gave one intrinsic prior, we gave one the normal distribution. And so we developed the spatial flexible parametric relative survival. But there's different distributions you can base these on. So this one's based on a Weibull distribution, so we get excess hazard ratios. But we found in some situations it actually had a better fit if we used a log logistic as our original distribution. And here you get excess odds ratios. And so I'll show you some results now from that form. And we did maps as well. But what I actually want to show you are our awesome predicted survival curves. So we're able to predict these for every single SLA and by covariates. And here we had age as a continuous covariate. So we're predicting these at age 60 years. And what we've done is we've taken the major city SLA, the highest predicted 5-year survival, and we're comparing that against our very remote SLA that had the lowest predicted 5-year survival. And for localized breast cancer, you can see there's very little difference here. There's actually only an absolute difference of 1.3% at 5 years. For advanced breast cancer, there are larger differences though, and at 5 years there was a difference of 6.7%. For colorectal cancer, both localized and advanced actually had quite large maximum differences here. The 5-year predicted survival difference for localized was 4.7%, and for advanced it was an absolutely huge 14% difference. So what this is saying is that if you're diagnosed with a localized breast cancer, it doesn't matter really where you live throughout the state, your chances of surviving that are really high. But if you're diagnosed with advanced breast cancer or localized or advanced colorectal cancer, so colorectal cancer at any stage, then where you live could really influence how likely you are to survive your cancer. And this work was actually quite rewarding. It was used to raise awareness about the extent of inequalities in cancer outcomes across Queensland, but it was also used to advocate successfully to increase patient travel subsidy scheme in Queensland. And this doesn't just help cancer patients, it actually helps any patient who needs to travel for any form of medical treatment throughout the state. The Queensland government also listened to us, and they actually included an objective in their cancer care service strategy to reduce variation in cancer outcomes throughout the state. And Cancer Council Queensland also employed additional staff in regional offices to better support rural cancer patients. So this was really rewarding, and as a result we decided to examine small area variation at the national level, and we embarked upon the Australian Cancer Atlas. Now we did actually spend a lot of time investigating different Bayesian and spatial models to try and determine which would be the best ones to use in the Australian context, because obviously it was a lot bigger and more complex than looking at Queensland. And all the details are available in a report that's really available online. But we actually ended up using the LaRue model for our incidence model. And this is very similar to that BYA model we saw before, but we just have the one random effect term instead of two. But that one term actually encompasses both spatial structure and unstructured variation because of the LaRue prior and the way it's formulated. And that's due to that rho component in that mean variance. So the rho can vary between 0 and 1. And it's probably easy to understand if we look at what happens with the extreme values of rho. So if rho equals 1, then you can see it reverts back to just the straight intrinsic conditional autoregressive prior. Conversely, if rho equals 0, it's just a very simple normal distribution. So that's the unstructured part. So depending on where rho is, depends on how much spatial structured variation is occurring and how much unstructured variation is occurring. And you can pre-specify what value you want rho to be in your model, but normally you'd allow the model itself to actually determine the value of rho. And for our survival model, rather surprisingly, we actually ended up using just a Poisson piecewise relative survival. And again, though, we had our LaRue prior for the smoothing on that rather than the BYM type smoothing. And you may be feeling rather shocked at this, given all the work that we did on flexible parametric models in Queensland. But those flexible parametric models are more complex. We're feeding data into them at the individual level. That means we have a lot more input data when we're at the Australian level. And it takes a lot of tweaking. We have to determine the appropriate number of knots for every single cancer and sex combination that we're doing. So if you wanted to predict smooth survival curves or absolute levels of risk, or if you wanted to include continuous covariates, then absolutely flexible parametric models are great. But because we didn't need to do that, it was actually simpler, and we could still get really good results to just use the Poisson piecewise relative survival model. Now, the Atlas was a joint project between Cancer Council Queensland, Queensland University of Technology, and Frontier SI, which is formerly known as the Cooperative Research Centre for Spatial Information. And we received cancer data and additional funding from the Australian Institute of Health and Welfare, and we also had additional support from 2 centres of research excellence. Our team was composed of many awesome people, and so it was led by Professors Peter Barty and Kerry Mengerson, but it was a multidisciplinary team, and we included experts in statistics. We also had cancer epidemiology experts, we had visualisation experts, project management experts, web design and IT infrastructure experts. And we also had a lot of input from our very wise and knowledgeable project advisory board, which was chaired by Professor David Roeder. Now, as you recall, a key thing about the Australian Cancer Atlas was we really wanted to include the uncertainty around the estimates. And Elle Duncan, one of the collaborators on this project, looked at a way we could do this through calculating posterior probability differences. So posterior probabilities are normally give the probability that an estimate is, say, above the average. But what Elle developed is just this difference, which literally is the absolute difference between the posterior probability of an estimate being above 1, which is the average, and the difference of the estimate being below 1, so above the average and below the average. And you can rephrase that so that it's just based on the one posterior probability. But this enabled us to calculate v-plots because whether an estimate is likely to be above or below, it is very high posterior probability difference value. So here on the x-axis, we have our SIR values, and on the y-axis are our PPDs, which is labeled probability. So everything that dark band is likely to be genuinely different to the national average. And if it's on the right, it'll be genuinely higher. If it's on the left, it'll be genuinely lower. So if we actually go into the atlas, and if we go to thyroid cancer, which is very far down here, and we're going to zoom into an area. So we're going to go to Inala, which is actually a low socioeconomic suburb in Brisbane. And as we zoom in, our viewport actually changes so it better reflects what's actually shown on the screen. If we click on this area, it will actually label it on our viewplot, and we then have the opportunity to also see the density plot for that area. And we're also going to compare this against another area. So we'll go to Darling Point, which is near here. Yeah. You can see it. And if you click on this, then again, it also shows an RV plot and density plot, but they're so similar, you basically can't distinguish them. But we're going to zoom out just partly so we can actually see how these areas are comparing against all of Australia in our V plot, but also so we can actually find those boxes again because they kind of vanished. And so these boxes are actually really clear in terms of carefully labeling all the different cancer types, so all the results for that area and sex combination. But we can select grid view to get a better visual overview of the patterns of cancer. You can see Inala has a lot more orange, indicating higher rates, and whereas Double Bay has more blue rates. If we look at lung cancer, you can see very different estimates for these two areas. Again, if we look at excess deaths, which are our survival measures here, very different measures for these two areas. So Inala has very high excess deaths, meaning low survival. Double Bay has low excess deaths, meaning high survival. And we can actually compare these in broad categories. So this is for lung cancer. And so we can see there's a clear gradient by socioeconomic status. But if we change to remoteness areas, there's also a very clear gradient by remoteness. We can look at the actual numbers of SH2s that are included in those categories. And we can see the colors clearly by looking at proportionally. We can also filter categories in the atlas. And we can do this continuously based on the actual diagnoses. So we can change this to be just seeing the ones that are 1 and above, so high estimates. And we can also filter on the probability differences. And so if we set it to be 60%, that's only going to select the areas in that band. You can see that on our map and our view plot. And if we change to a different cancer type, those filters actually stay in place. But we can also filter, we can take off the diagnosis filter, so we can then actually see just which areas are genuinely different, whether above or below the national average. And we can filter categorically by looking just at the remote areas, say, if we take off the other categories. So you can see for melanoma, most of the areas that are genuinely different tend to be lower, but some are higher. And if we change to head and neck cancers, every single remote area that actually has a genuine difference to the national average actually has higher estimates. We can also actually download a PDF of screenshots. So that's handy if you just want to have something to take with you, or we can share the exact link. And you can share that on social media, but I'll just open up a new tab here with the link. And just one really nice feature about this is that it doesn't just show you the actual map view that you have on the screen, but it will also show the exact graphs that you had on the screen as well. So you can make sure it's showing you full full story you want to tell. And the PDF is just a 4-page document with a screenshot and some summary statistics around that. But another thing that's great for statisticians is you can download all of the estimates that we have in the atlas. So you enter your email into data download, they send you an email, you click on the link, and you have to get a zipped folder with 5 files in it. And 2 of those files, the Excel workbooks, are designed for you to just flick through and pull out the estimates you need. They're nicely formatted and easy to find. 2 of those are just CSV files, so they're designed for you to read into your preferred statistical software. And I just want to reiterate, these estimates are model estimates only at the SAT level. We're not allowed to release any raw data at that SAT level. So just a couple of other features I want to highlight. So one is the evidence of variation. And here, I hope you can see, it's like 3 green bars there. And this varies by cancer type, but this is purely based on Tango's mean. So 3 bars equals our strong categories from Queensland, 2 bars equals our moderate, 1 bar would be weak, and if there's no bars, that equals the no category from the Queensland estimates. Another really nice feature, and the way that we show the uncertainty on the actual maps, is our transparency overlay. And you can turn this on or off, but the default is for it to be on. And this is a pale yellow color, which has a gradient, and it's overlaid on our map colors. So it's based on the PPD values. So if you have a PPD of 100%, so if it's right at the top of the V-plot, that's completely translucent in that overlay. But if it's right at the bottom of the V-plot, if it's a PPD of 0%, it'll be completely pale yellow opaque. There's a continuous gradient between them. And just to give you a demonstration of the impact of it, if we turn it off, you can see it gets that little bit brighter. But having it on really shows more information about the importance of the estimates. Another feature is the tours. So we have several, and some are around the methods and how to interpret the atlas, but others are on specific cancer types. And it just talks you through the background on the cancer. It gives you information about the patterns and what you're seeing. It zooms to different things and filters and just helps you understand a bit better exactly what these patterns mean. And we also have additional details in the methods and the data, and FAQs are all in our container website as well. So the atlas has, we've been pretty happy actually with how people have been using it and with the uptake. So although most users are based in Australia, the people from all around the world have used it. And out of mobiles, desktops and tablets, almost 45% of users were actually on their mobiles, which is kind of surprising. And researchers have also used this work. So it's been showcased in the Master of Cancer Sciences offered through the University of Melbourne. Our liver cancer results have also been featured in the Viral Hepatitis Mapping Project report, which was released in April this year. And Stephanie Kabakian, a master's student from Monash, she's been looking at doing cartogram mapping. So this allows you to actually see clearly the exact patterns with each SH2 represented in exactly the same shape and size. So where are we going in the future? So we're actually wanting to include additional cancer types. We're wanting to include additional indicators. We currently have incidence and survival, but we're looking to include cancer screening patterns and even some treatment patterns for specific cancers. We want to include different time periods so that you can actually see how things are changing over time. We've also been working with the New Zealand Ministry of Health to help them develop their very own New Zealand Cancer Atlas. And we want to include additional tours so that every single cancer type included has a tour that goes with that. So I hope you now understand why I think cancer mapping is so important and why I feel the Australian Cancer Atlas is actually at the pinnacle of evolution of cancer maps to date. We've found that it's been really useful and helpful for people, but we're always keen to get your feedback and input on just what you think is working well, on any potential collaborations you could suggest, or on any additions you would like. So please contact us anytime. Thank you for your attention.